Right, recording has started and we are streaming back live on YouTube after our brief break to continue our discussion on the task force recommendations. And Mark, I just want to say I appreciate you bringing up that your clarifying question about the procedural aspects of this, because there are many parts. The task force met for many months without the town board, and now with the police chief, and now we are meeting with the police chief and without task force members in conversation. And I realize there can be some disconnect there, but it is an iterative process, and we will indeed need the public to weigh in as we move forward. So thank you for that. All right, last time we left off at what is labeled in the notes as A1, where it starts talking about the body camera footage, just to give everyone a place of where we are. And this one, current policy is to store body camera footage for 90 days for incidents that do not end in arrest. A policy should be put in place that keeps footage involving a complaint for as long as is needed for investigation. And the action item here from the HPD in response to this is none at this time, as this is already standard practice. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Chief Hampton?
Yeah, just going back, just procedurally, this is all under kind of the big umbrella of the advisory board should hear community complaints and be able to promptly respond. And these points were under here. No, I think this is just an area that the task force either we didn't get into or didn't understand. You know, the standard is to keep videos of things that don't have anything else related to them for 90 days, which is actually far above what I think the state retention is. So far, it's been working out for storage, so it's good. But as soon as we know something's a complaint or a use of force, they all get tagged with a setting that we have that basically means they don't get deleted until we manually go in and release them in some way. So those things all get held. And we do that because we realize, you know, one, we set 90 days because we know complaints often come up and issues often show up, you know, a month or two down the road. And then, like I said, we want to make sure we do retain them so we can look into them.
All right, thank you. Comments or questions from board members on this one?
Just to clarify, when footage is utilized in a proceedings, and I understand
that legal proceeding.
Right. Well, you know, yeah, legal proceedings. You know, I understand that it's kept until there is a disposition, whatever that disposition is. What happens, or what's the length of keeping it after a disposition?
We hold anything that's involving a misdemeanor crime that is potentially evidentiary or attached to a misdemeanor case is held for at least 3 years. Anything that is connected with a felony crime is held essentially for 20 years. What we do is burn them out of our system and turn them into evidence. So really they stay in our evidence locker. We don't purge them very often. They all would have to be manually purged. So just once every so often we go through there. You know, if it's 6 years down the road, the case gets disposed of, all appeals are disposed of. Basically, when the judge says you can throw away all the evidence, that would potentially be disposed of along with all the other evidence. But that's a court process. It's usually fairly far down the process. If it's attached to a legal proceeding, it's treated essentially as evidence.
Okay.
Mark.
And the question is about policies and procedures. Is that a practice that you have, or is it an actual policy and procedure regarding retention and then going through, you know, whatever once a year to comb out things that are 20 years old or 3 years old, whether it's a felony or misdemeanor?
I have to go look and see exactly what the wording is, to be honest with you. I think in our policy on use of force, it may talk about the reviews and how we tag them. I'd have to go back and double check that. I don't have that at my fingertips.
Okay.
Exactly what it says about that, because we also tag a lot of things. If there's anything we think is potentially an internal review, we try to lock those things down. That may be covered in our IA policy. I would just have to double check that.
Okay. I'm curious about, because wasn't a member of the task force, so I was not privy to the conversations that went on, but I come from a healthcare and an IT background. So policies and procedures are, really essential. And has always been really important to make sure we have them, or the clients that I'm advising, to make sure they have these policies and procedures. So this, along with everything else, I'm probably going to ask the same question. If it's a recommendation for a policy, I'm going to ask, do we have a policy for that? So thank you.
Good question, Mark. Matt.
Something someone else said sparked this question for me, Chief. What happens with evidence, including video evidence, when you said when something has been handled in the courts, maybe appeals have been exhausted or whatnot. What about expunctions? How do those get communicated to you?
Well, we get an official notice from the court that, the records are going to be expunged. I don't know how that plays into the property. I don't think we've had any that I can think of that we got an expunction that also had property, but I'd have to check on it. My initial thought is we would have to expunge, the persons from the property, and I don't know that they can be divested that way. So I'm not exactly sure how we would address that. I don't have an answer for you on that. I can check on that and get back to you. Lieutenant Trimmer generally handles those, so I'm suspect he has an answer, but let me just double check on it.
Kathleen, you have another?
Yeah, no, because I realized I really didn't get I don't know if I didn't ask very well, but I'm not sure I got an answer to, I know you were talking about it's held for 20 years, but when that property, when it comes, at the end of 20 years, what happens? Do we hunt down people who it belonged to? So, it's not always the defendant. It's not all, that property may belong to someone else or whatever. And then I'm not sure I was really clear what happens to it if, there is no conviction. And I know it's similar to the expunction, but it's like I wasn't clear what actually happens.
Right.
Once, that decision is whether it's the 20-year or, there is no conviction or it's dismissed or blah, blah, blah.
Usually if there's no conviction, then the person be contacted if there's personal property that belongs to them and it would just be returned to them. That's very common. It's either going to be that or we'll get a notice from the court that we can dispose of the property. Again, if we can track down the owner, if it's of value and return it to them, we will. Otherwise it gets destroyed.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, let's move to the next one. Dwayne, I just want to say I appreciate the fact that these are kind of attached to that umbrella of the discussion about the advisory board. So that will be its own discussion. But I just want to note that these were tied. Some of these are tied to that and recommendations for the advisory board. But I think that these are okay for us to talk about. Just the same. So then the next one is regarding policy being put in place to allow an advisory board to see body camera footage. And the HPD action was none at this time. If an advisory board is created, then this can be revisited, but we believe this will only be possible with legislative changes. So Maybe you could speak to the legal issues, Chief Hampton, and then we might need Bob to chime in too. Or if
Right,
you want to
the
just toss
bottom-
it to Bob, that's fine.
Well, the bottom line is that the way the state law is written, we can disclose, which means allow a person in the video to view the portions of the video that they are in. We can't give them a recording. We can't make it public. We can also disclose that to their personal representative. And one of the things the task force had suggested was the idea of, well, if we had an advisory board, could they be designated the personal representative and see stuff that way? Which actually was a really, really innovative way to think about it. But unfortunately, the state law defines what personal representative is, and it's a legal personal representative. So it doesn't give us the leeway there. The other option is releasing the video, and that can only be done with court order. So again, and we've pursued that angle before. So this is one of those areas where, you know, the law makes it somewhat impractical as it stands right now for this to become a regular practice. Now, obviously, we could always go to a judge, get them to agree to release the video. But, you know, again, as a regular rule of thumb, that may not work all the time.
Matt and then Mark.
Well, that was actually you kind of preempted my question on that is, you know, I don't think we could release it. And even if you could release it, I feel like even if for some reason a person could designate this advisory board as that personal representative, I think we would get into some issues there as well because of public meetings and that sort of thing. And I guess you could have a closed session of an advisory board, but I think that might not also be something that's available. So it does seem like it would need some legislative change for sure.
Mark?
Chief, I'm just curious, which court hears these kinds of requests?
I believe it is a superior court judge. It has to be a superior court judge, not a district court judge.
And if a person, if the subject makes that request and is able to, you know, to see that footage, then are they allowed to release it themselves? No. Yeah.
No, again, disclosure means we can show it to them. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean they can record it, release it, do
They don't
anything
have
with
it on
it.
their own.
Yeah, they can't.
Yeah.
They can't do that on the way this law is written.
Yeah. And just a reminder, and maybe Bob, if you remember the background on this, that these prohibitions, as I recall, are pretty recent, and that they were passed by the state legislature. Anyway, they were passed by the state legislature recently for their own reasons, pretty recently. So these are some newer parameters that people are having to work around and with.
Yeah, I want to say within the last 5 years, maybe it might have been a year either way, but it's really pretty recently enacted law. Yeah, and with respect to disclosing to a person who's in the video, doesn't mean you can give them the video. It means you can let them see it. So it's really relatively restrictive. And there's a hierarchy, like Chief was saying, of the circumstances under which you can disclose, release, and court orders are involved along the hierarchy too. So it's not simple.
No.
Wasn't there some changes in this last legislative session? No, I was thinking that maybe it didn't pass, but I was thinking that there was some sort of change.
I think there were some discussions, and I don't know how far along they got, but there was some proposal by somebody to modify the statute, but it wasn't changed not the most recent session or the current session.
Okay. The never-ending session.
Yeah, right.
Okay, anything else on this particular item? Okay. Moving on to number 2, current use of force policy is vague. The advisory board must suggest and or create clearer policies about when use of force is justified. And then the HPD action items are that the HPD will continue to regularly review policy and practices in this area and keep up with professional trends and promising practices. HPD will continue to educate the public on our policy and welcome public feedback. HPD will continue to focus on policy, training, and education as tools to ensure the best possible outcomes. I think I'll just suggest we put the piece about the advisory board in the parking lot for when we have that discussion about whether we want the advisory, any of that whole discussion about how they might, address use of force policy. But, I'd love to hear questions, comments from the board about this, and Dwayne, your response about the policy and how it's conveyed.
Would you like me to start?
Sure.
Like I said, the bottom line is, I guess we don't really agree or understand fully with this recommendation. We think we've got a very solid policy. Policy can't be crafted to cover every possibility our officers run into. So our use of force is governed by a lot of things. It's governed by the policy, which is very important. It's governed by case law, which sets the precedents we deal with. It's also governed by the training that we put our officers through. So those things all work together. So I guess, the problem is you can't look at policy here in a vacuum. To me, our policy is very, very clear, but officers get into situations all the time where we have to interpret policy. So it's important, again, that we back that up with the training, with the scenarios we do, with, educating the officers, with staying current on the case law. And we're always kind of constantly watching and evolving these policies. We put this policy in place a number of years ago, actually incorporating a lot of models out of Canada and some other places that when we put this in place, I think was really ahead of the time. I think the times have kind of, a lot of agencies have ended up where we are. We have things in our policy that a lot of other folks don't have, like the fact that we review every time our officers display a weapon. There are a lot of places that still don't do that. So again, we've tried to be ahead of the game, but a lot of folks want to be able to put use of force in, and well, if A, then do B, if B, then do C. And the situations are just too dynamic. There's too many millions of variables. So we have to give the officers guidance and guidelines to work within, and then train to make sure that we stay within those guidelines.
Thank you. Mark.
I think you probably answered a lot of what I was going to ask, which was kind of about the policy itself. And it seems to me that, being a layperson, that what a policy might look like to a law enforcement officer might be gobbledygook compared to what I might be able to understand as a layperson. And so my question is, because I was not privy to the conversation, but I guess that Jen or Chief, the task force asked a lot of questions about the use of force policy, and did you share with them what those policies were, or did you summarize them, or how did the task force come to the conclusion that the policy needs to be clearer? And I'm assuming that the request for a policy that is clearer is that for public consumption, or is that for the law enforcement need a policy that is clearer to better enable them to restrain from using force when not necessary, but still being able to use force when it's required? Does that make sense?
Yes. The short answer to this is, we presented our use of force policy and kind of went through it with them. There really wasn't any follow-up discussion, and I was involved in no discussion that I think generated this recommendation. So this is one of those areas where, when we get to the next phase of this with interaction, more getting feedback from the task force, I think it's an area we have to explore, because I don't understand it. I think I answered both parts of that. Sorry.
No, that's great. And Mark, I think that your question is a good one, and something that I've personally just been ruminating over throughout this process is that, and I think I might have said this at our last discussion, is that because we've had several discussions as a town board about some of these topics over time, where, some of that knowledge is just more familiar to us as board members, that I think it's one of those things where it's not always easy to tell what the community does not know or understand, and that this is helping illuminate that. So, I think that just like Dwayne said, that when the time comes to, kind of, this is on a list of things that I think that more engagement with task force members is needed to see what would make this policy more understandable to the public. And to get to your question, do they think that needs to be more understandable to lay people who just want to know what our police department policies are, or to officers, so that, force is not being used, unnecessarily or too much. So I think you're getting at the right question we need to engage with the group on. Rob?
I was gonna say, I do appreciate hearing that, Chief, also that, that we just need to explore kind of this more. I know there's just certain situations where it dictates kind of what happens next. And you don't always know what those situations are going to be. I'm curious if the new simulator that I believe I don't know if it's up and running and stuff, but will that help kind of simulate some of these scenarios and situations to help train officers with use of force in those and make those sort of decisions? And can you share some of how that can be? Or
yeah, and that's exactly what that piece of equipment is for, is to put officers into scenarios where we can control what happens, what they experience, and they can go through the scenario. We can coach them on it. We can talk about how policy applies. That's exactly what it's for. We've gotten it moved over from where we were using it to the new training building. And actually, one of the things we're working on right now is kind of trying to pick a day that we can invite, you guys as the board to come experience this thing, maybe the media to come see it, some of our citizens. It's also a good educational tool, but again, it's one of these things where we're going to be able to educate people kind of one at a time. And it's going to take a long time for folks to experience these. But I mean, if you search on the internet, you'll find example after example of folks who were advocates of certain positions about policing, and then they experience these simulators, they realize how dynamic the environment is, and it can really be a great educational tool. So it's good for the officers, but if we can use it from a community engagement standpoint, I think it'll be good for community members too, to kind of experience how these things can evolve. And it's a good system for that. So that's kind of our plan, is to go both ways with it.
excellent. And then, is there certain use of forces that, can you share with us certain things that, are just off the table that you don't do, that are, very kind of clear? And I apologize for my,
No, it's fine. And it's hard to say something is completely off the table, because if an officer is fighting for their life against somebody, we pretty much take all the things away, all the restrictions away, and say, look, if you're fighting for your life and you're losing that fight, you may have to do some things that are unorthodox. Warning shots. We prohibit warning shots. We prohibit shooting at or from a moving vehicle unless there's a very narrow set of parameters that are very, very hard to meet. That essentially you've got to know there's no other choice, there's no other alternative. And most of the time we can just get out of the way, because you're not going to stop a car if you shoot it. That's, it's not going to happen. Choke holds. We don't let folks use choke holds or vascular holds, or all the ways you want to describe those things. Again, except if it is a deadly force situation. again, where are the officers fighting for their life? So we have a lot of things that are off the table unless you're in the worst possible scenario where you can justify that you were in basically losing a fight for your life. There's other prohibitions in places. If we have a handcuffed suspect, well, you can't punch or fight or kick, a handcuffed suspect. But again, there are a few caveats, like you may have to potentially pepper spray or tase one if they are being really assaultive. And we've had that happen before. We haven't had to resort to that. So there's a lot of if-thens to them, but there are some things that are prohibited. If we've got somebody who's in an elevated position where, if you shouldn't use a taser on them, if the risk of injury from being tased and falling down is greater than, again, we want to avoid that. They're running across pavement. So there are a lot of parameters in which force can and can't be used, very situational.
And then last question on this too, like how frequent do officers kind of encounter these situations where they have to use force? Is it a daily thing? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Or
maybe again, this is where this topic and conversation gets really challenging, because it's what do we define as use of force? We use a very broad definition. We say it's a use of force if the officers engage, have to do anything physical with somebody that's beyond normal compliant handcuffing. So if you go to lay your hands on somebody and they pull away from you and you hold on and you tussle with them for a second and then they give in, you've used force. If you have to carry somebody to the magistrate's office because they won't walk, you've used force. So our definition is very broad compared to what a lot of people think about, which is where an officer's tackling somebody, fighting somebody, things like that. Uses of force happen, we have, 20 or 30 a year by our definition. So you're talking about every other week or so, we have something. When you move to what is the common picture you have when it's use of force, maybe one every month that's actually a real use of force, maybe 2 a month. I don't think we tased anybody in 2021. We might have tased one in 2020. So again, no use of our baton. So our officers resort to a lot of other things before we have to use that kind of force. Most of our uses of force are physical force, occasionally having to take someone to the ground and try and wrestle with them a little bit. Most of them are somebody who's turning to run and the officers have to grab them and hold on to them. That's the vast majority of our stuff.
Oh, well, thank you, Chief.
And this is also where this whole thing becomes so complicated, because there isn't a common definition. We take a broad definition because we want to make sure we're looking at even these little things, that we're doing things the right way. There are a lot of agencies out there that the threshold is much higher than ours. So again, I think there's another example where we try to go above and beyond to make sure we're doing things the right way.
Other questions or comments here? All right. Thank you. And before we move to the next topic, I just want to, I am getting tired. I'm having a hard time formulating my thoughts clearly. So just before we move to the next section, just say that it's, this is an item to engage with more with the task force members when we have the opportunity, and other members of the public, to be sure that people are getting the answers that they are seeking, especially when task force members wrote this recommendation. And then also just to put a pin in Mark's point that having that the difference between practices and policies can be really important, because we want to have good policies in place that outlast figures. So I just appreciate you bringing that point up, and I know that Chief, that there were a few things back now, I can't remember what it was called now, but there was a handful of recommendations that were kind of making nationwide rounds. Some of them we had already put in place before they were being advocated for. And then some of them we had in place as practices, but not as policies. And I believe that was some of the action that you took previously, was trying to put those things into actual policies. So just want to say that's an important practice in and of itself. So let's keep in that direction. All right, next is item number 3. Procedures shall be developed where officers do not need to be in full tactical gear to respond to non-criminal or non-emergency calls. The HPD action items are: HPD continues to evaluate the equipment they ask officers to carry. HPD explores new and lighter products, as well as assessing whether any items could be eliminated or made optional. HPD will continue to explore other products that can benefit employee health, while at the same time providing a softer image. So I know you have several paragraphs here, Dwayne. Do you want to add to those? Any comments to the action items?
The biggest thing I'll add is just that, like I said, we moved to these external, this idea of full tactical gear, I'm going to push back against. I don't understand that picture exactly. Our officers wear an external carrier. The reason we moved to these was to get all the equipment they were already carrying up off their belts to improve their health. We did take this to the board before we did it. So again, nothing we've done has been in a vacuum. We showed you guys what we were, the board at the time, what we were looking to go to. We understand the thought process behind this, but as far as I know, this is being driven by one person's conversation. I have not heard anyone else ever mention this beyond the one person. And again, this is an area that was not discussed with us by the task force at all. So this may be something we've got to go back and revisit. The idea that the officers can outfit for the type of call for service that they're responding to just isn't the way reality is of what the officers are experiencing. It's not their lived reality. We don't have a forewarning of which calls are necessarily going to be dangerous, which ones aren't. They don't know when they're going to arrive at something and have to go into a house and be in total darkness and need a flashlight. Most of the equipment we carry is essentially the standard practice or recommendations and through across our professions about having backup equipment. The idea, again, if I could share my screen for just a second, I'll just show you if that's all right. Is that all right, Mayor? I'm sorry. Oh, hang on.
Sorry, go right ahead.
Is that okay? Okay. Let me see if this works. I'm not sure. There we go. Are y'all seeing a picture from our Facebook page?
Yes.
I just want to show you, that's what our officers are outfitted with. And I can find another one here real quickly. Another example, we tried to choose a carrier that matched the uniform color and style, that tried to blend in a little bit. This one at least has pockets. There are a lot of them that were more militaristic in how they looked, and they were black and had, all the Molly gear, and you strip stuff to them. But our officers are carrying a lot of stuff. They're carrying flashlights, they're carrying tourniquets, they're carrying extra pistol magazines, they're carrying handcuffs. But we've gotten a significant amount of that weight up off their belt, which I think is really the important point here for their long-term health and safety. And I'll stop sharing now. So that's pretty much all the feedback I've got on that.
Thank you. Mark.
You mentioned the term that I'm not familiar with, Molly gear.
It's like the little straps that are all over the vest, like the military guys have all over their vests, and they can clip all kinds of stuff to it. These vests have a little bit of the strapping down where it's harder to see, but a lot of the vests you see out there, you can strap stuff kind of all over them. The vests we're using, they're limited in where they can place the gear.
Kathleen.
I am curious about the task force conversation because, when this came up in Fairview Community Watch, there were members of the task force in attendance, and the response was actually it was handed off to HPD to address, but there was no community discussion of this as an issue. So, I mean, I apart from, we have heard from, Mr. Mullaney, but in the Fairview community, and I know that there were Fairview community members that were part of the task force. So I'm really curious how this came about in the task force when they didn't speak up about it with a community member or even within Community Watch. And I'm scratching my head, wanting to understand more.
I'll chime in with what I know, and then Mayor, if you'll fill in the gaps. I know that Mr. Mullaney made a presentation to the task force. I don't believe there was any follow-up conversation at that time. I have not had any follow-up conversation with anybody from the task force about this, about that topic whatsoever. And I'm aware that he made the same presentation to Fairview, but that's all I know.
Well, I was at the Fairview meeting, so that's why I would love to know what the task force discussion was, because I was hoping to hear from the task force members who are members of Fairview, and nobody addressed or talked about it. So I was hoping that there could be some enlightenment. And excuse me, the dog.
It's all good. Like you say, that's a horse, not a dog.
Yes, it is horse puppy.
So the only thing I would have to add is that I think that the best way to usually get the information that we're seeking from people is to ask them directly. So I think that this would be a good thing to again, put on the list of things to talk with task force members about. Just as a reminder that when it came time to write the recommendations, task force members divided into two groups, and they met on their own to draft the recommendations. Because it did, and this was based on feedback that we were getting from them, is that it felt important for those to be drafted without without even the appearance of the mayor or the police chief kind of being in the room influencing what the recommendations were, so that they could have frank conversations, that then we can keep having these conversations, even though sometimes it's hard, right? When you're trying to figure out what people were thinking. So my best assumption is that the group that made this recommendation probably made this recommendation in an effort because they had heard this as a concern from Mr. Mullaney. And they may also have concerns too, but I don't know that, because I also have not heard that from other members other than seeing it here in the recommendations. So I think it's something that, we need to hear more about. So does that answer your question, Kathleen?
I mean, no, it's informative. I wasn't sure if anybody else had heard anything. It's informative that we haven't heard any further discussion from other folks, but want to have further conversation.
I think that I'd be interested to hear what other board members think, but this strikes me as another item where, we're under constraints in part because of our size and capacity, because we don't have the capacity to kind of ramp up different groups of response teams that are in different types of gear. Now, the town could choose to invest in that, but I think it would be a big question for the town is, would that be the best use of our resources to do that? Anyway, I just wanted to kind of make that comment that when we're a small jurisdiction with limited resources, that we're going to have different options available to us.
And I agree. I was only speaking, I wanted to hear what I was trying to frame and not doing a very good job was, I just wanted to hear if more than one person had this concern. And certainly I want to hear from the task force when we get to that point.
Rob.
Yeah, actually, like to both of your points, I think, the size of our town, as you mentioned, Mayor Weaver, doesn't always give us the opportunity to have the perfect dress or I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm losing my train of thought too. We kind of have to dress in a way that we, again, as Chief Hampton alluded to, can handle any kind of situation. They don't have the opportunity to, dress down, while going to a call and taking the time to kind of dress down too. I don't even know what full tactical gear looks like, but when I've seen Hillsborough police officers, it's not my vision of full tactical gear is a next level above that. Helmets and a whole lot more sort of military sort of gear. I do encourage you to continue to look at how we can lighten the load, whether it's off the belt or somewhere else too, because I do feel that there's a lot of weight that our officers carry, and do we really need everything? I don't know how often you use a baton, but it seems like having a gun and a knife and a baton, and I think there's something else actually I'll carry too. Is that necessary? And I think, for some officers, they would say yes. But for others, they may not feel that same way too. But our image, I think also, we mentioned earlier that there's 20 to 30 use of force kind of things a year. And if that's really the case, I don't know. I want to again continue to have this discussion and find out more from the task force and stuff too. But I do think there's ways that we can be. I don't know what the words I'm looking for, but it is kind of a perception and an image thing, and we want to to not scare people, but at the same time you have to be protected and be safe in order to maintain safety. But I think there's I think there's some room for potentially addressing this a little bit. I don't know if that made any sense at all. I apologize for just kind of going around in circles, but
Go ahead, Dwayne, and then Kathleen, I'm not sure if you.
Sorry, I forgot to put it down.
I'm just going to chime in. Our philosophy has always been giving the officers as many alternatives as we can. The bottom line is any piece of equipment we take away is one less option they may have. Yes, we have not had to use a baton in a use of force incident. Have they used them in other situations? Yes, they have. We haven't had to use it to strike someone, but they have had to use them in other situations, whether it's breaking a window or doing things like that. But, again, it's with any tool, evaluating the tool, how much do we need it? Well, you never need a tool until you need it. We want them to have as many options as possible to avoid us having to go to the really bad option. And that's a lot of where our philosophy is. But we are, again, currently evaluating these things. We've done a lot of things trying to get the weight off. That's where our big push is with these carriers, is keeping that weight off the belt, because we know that causes long-term health injuries and they're carrying so much stuff. But again, it's hard to prepare for the unexpected, and we've got to give the officers as many tools to be prepared as we can. I don't know how we would be able to live with it if an officer gets into a situation because we've removed some tool that they may have needed, and that's tough. And again, I do want to remind that as far as I know, I've only heard of one complaint on this particular issue. And there may be others that feel the same way. You know, our officers try to take the most, positive approach possible with folks. And there are a lot of options. You know, the full military gear is ballistic helmets and big ballistic plates, and we do have those. We have those options. We have the rifle plates and the helmets for officers, but those only come out in very limited situations. So, we haven't had to deploy those yet. But again, when you think about things like a school shooting, how many communities have a school shooting? We've had things like that happen very close to home here. So it's one of those things where we try to be as prepared as we can for every eventuality. And, I think it speaks to our officers that we have tools that we haven't had to use. Because there have been situations, and plenty, where they could have employed a tool, but chose not to. So I think it's just something to keep in mind.
There are questions or comments about this? Yeah, Rob.
So real quick, Chief. So if an officer's like on a bike or on a walking patrol, are they wearing the same thing as they would be if they were in a patrol car?
On a foot patrol, yes. We're evaluating the bicycles, trying to figure out what we might be able to move to a bag in the bike versus on a vest. That's been one of our challenges, trying to kind of figure out how to outfit them, because it's probably not that easy to ride a bike in this. We do allow for some administrative uniforms, some reduction in stuff if they're working certain assignments, like our detectives are in plain clothes and they're not carrying all the stuff. So it's really the folks only that are frontline responding to 911 calls for service. Now, from a financial standpoint, we haven't bought different vests. Like if somebody goes from patrol to investigations, we're letting them just put the same external carrier on if they have to go out in the field and do stuff. And it's, from a cost savings aspect, we don't need to go buy another vest carrier and things like that, because it's versatile. And often they have some of the same tools. So they'll throw it on when they're going out in the field to do what could be anticipated to be responding to stuff.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions here? And the only thing I would add at this time is that one of the challenges when we're thinking about what the public is asking for, and I mean that very broadly speaking, what sparked this conversation in the first place and what sparked the national conversation is that a town like Hillsborough, we don't have a lot of crime. And so I think it's about trying to help us all understand, us, the police department, us, the town board, us, the public, is we don't have a lot of crime. And we also, are responsible for public safety, and our police officers need to be able to respond to unpredictable incidents. And so I'm just holding those two things in tandem. And I think that there's a desire for there to be really clear answers. And I'm not sure that there is, that's, I think it's really difficult. But I certainly understand the desire that part of the, just on a logistical level, what our officers look like partly has to do with the decision that was made, that was endorsed by this board to have some of that equipment higher up, so it's better on their bodies. I mean, that's one of the basics. And then, is all the equipment necessary? I just, I appreciate Rob's question, just in, encouraging an openness to continuing to think about that, and being sure that that's, being thought about ongoing. Because we just need to be able to explain that to people, I think.
I
Matt?
have a question. I'm sorry.
Well, Matt had his hand up, and then Kathleen.
No worries.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate. I don't know why my light suddenly went off, so hopefully I can uh, make my video more lighter. But I think to the chief's point, I know we've had two situations in the last 2 years, one of which was just not that long ago, last week, where officers had to respond very quickly, and I'm not sure if they would have the ability to be able to assess in both cases. Those were issues involving firearms, and firearms had been used. And when seconds can be critical to responding and saving a life. I just don't know, having ridden along with our officers before and also our sheriff's department, just how possible it is to make those assessments, very quickly. When you need to respond to you need to be somewhere like 5 seconds before you leave, or 30 seconds before. So I think if we can look at, maybe surveying the officers, and I think, Chief, this may have happened before in terms of making things lighter, but surveying the officers again, what needs to be on their person. For example, I know you mentioned, tourniquets. They also have first aid kits in their cars as well. So is that something that might be able to be removed, or the baton, is that something that can be kept in the back with some of the other gear they have, because it's not used regularly for use of force, for example. Like you said, they're used more often for non use of force situations. So I think still having that equipment nearby might be good, and lighten the load, but not dispensing with it altogether. I think just because you just don't know what's going on, or what kind of situation you're entering into.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Kathleen.
Yeah, no, this is just something that occurred to me. Chief, you were talking about lightening the load, and we've talked about that when we made the purchase. And I don't remember if we asked, but I'm thinking, on the chest, it certainly makes a difference for men with, and the strength of the shoulders, but for the women, the hips, I'm wondering, does that make sense? So where I'm going, are these vests, have they been tested on women and weight distribution for the, just the female body mechanics and just structure versus the male? And you may not know that, but it was something that I realized we didn't ask originally.
I believe they have. We work with vendors on these, and a lot of these vests have been tested out on a lot of different groups. I will tell you that pretty much across the board, male and female, the officers very much prefer these. It allows them to get out of this vest from time to time. It's much better, much more comfortable than the concealed vests that are up under their shirts. Because the reality is these things weigh a lot, just the vests themselves. They are not comfortable. They're not fun to wear in any way, shape, or form. They do have models that are designed for female body types versus male body types. And what we do, we send the officers to the vendors, they measure them. So each one of these is custom measured for the folks involved. But
I think I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, study after study after study talks about the benefits of getting that weight up off the belt. Male, female, they all become subject to the back injuries of long-term weight on that waist.
No, I mean, that makes sense. And I figured there was, but it was one of those I realized we hadn't asked and I wasn't sure. So thank you.
Eric.
From a risk management standpoint, since I've been here, we've had multiple claims of injuries to officers that were wearing the old style traditional belts. And what happened in those vehicle accidents, which were not the officer's fault, that they were rear-ended by another vehicle. The most recent one we had a few years ago was out on Highway 70. Orange high school student got blinded by the sun. Anyway, rear-ended one of our vehicles pretty bad. And because of the gear that was on the belt behind the officer, it torqued their body and we got workers' comp claims and injuries. And so when the chief came to me about the change, we'd had these, over the years. So that's something that you wouldn't think of, but it happens. So another reason for going away from the old gear.
Thank you, Eric. Other questions on this piece? Okay. So it's 10:40. I'm wondering if this might be a good stopping place, or if people want to, I'm seeing at least one head nod. Is this a good pause? Bob, you don't have a vote. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding.
Let me just say thank you for asking. I think it is a good time because I see at least 2 more hours of conversation, and I think once in 6 years have we gone over midnight to a meeting, and I vowed never to do it again if it can be avoided. So I would gladly entertain picking this conversation up at the next meeting.
All right.
I would agree for early morning day jobs. I know I would be grateful to actually have more than a couple, 3 hours of sleep.
All right. I'm Rob.
But I was going to say, I concur. I mean, I think this is extremely important. It's a great conversation, and I want to give it the time and the energy that it deserves. So I'm fine with stopping here and picking up later, and not feeling any rush to get it done.
All right. Thank you. I think that there's a general agreement on this point. So again, appreciate all the conversation and great questions. And thank you, everybody. Now I have to find my agenda again. Oh, the next item I do remember is to discuss about returning to in-person meetings. And so various jurisdictions are doing this at different times. Sorry, I'm totally floundering. So I'm just going to turn back to my iPad. The county has already gone back. Chapel Hill is not going back until April. And I do not recall if Carver has yet made a decision on what they are doing. I know that City of Durham, they are requiring masks inside City Hall for another week until the 21st, I believe. And I'm sorry, I can't recall off the top of my head. I know that Eric sent us around that update, and I just can't remember what City of Durham is doing. So I think we have several options before us. We can decide to meet in person next week for the budget retreat on Monday. There was a request from staff that if that happens to, just have a limited number of staff and have others, we'll just have a limited number of staff in the room. So we're keeping our numbers small, or we can keep that one virtual, make a different decision, and come back in person in April, or not. And of course, just a reminder that if at any point the governor lifts the statewide state of emergency, all this is rendered moot. And at that point, we have to come back in person no matter what. So if people could, as briefly as possible, but say what you need to say, say what your preferences are, and let's see if we can come to some form of consensus. Rob, do you want to start?
I will go with the pleasure of this board. I've been in person and for a long time. Today was actually the first day that the staff at Chapel weren't required to wear masks indoors. We stopped requiring the public to wear a mask indoors starting the 7th. That said, there are a lot of buildings and facilities that are still closed in town. As you mentioned, all employees are supposed to be back in the buildings in some shape or form by April 11th. But our community centers are open, our aquatic center pools are open. Obviously, police and fire and many public works staff have been coming in for a long time. So I'm ready, but at the same time, I can wait till whenever. And then I would like to hear from from Eric and Hillsborough and our staff. But for the 21st, I think that if we do it in person, I wouldn't be my expectation that all the staff that would normally be at a budget retreat would be there. And I think just the department heads or whoever those key personnel you feel that need to be there is fine with me. But
All right, Eric, you want to jump in? Just
Uh,
because
oh,
Rob
so-
said he'd like to hear.
Oh, sure. So we're talking about the retreat because I know we were talking about offices. Oh, just a quick comment on reopening of town offices at our last operations team meeting. We've got basically 3 facilities. We've got the town hall campus, the town hall annex, and the police department. And we want to open everything up to minimize confusion at one time. The most complicated reopening is the annex because of the billing office, the traffic, and we need to get all the electronics up. So the finance director and we're having our bi-weekly meeting on Wednesday. So Stephanie was checking in last week to see when they are going to be ready to open. Once they're ready to open, we'll coordinate, we'll get word out, and we'll have town offices reopen. I always hate to give any time estimates on anything, but relatively soon. As far as the retreat goes, personally, I'm fine if we want to meet in person. I think it's important, especially like most of it's going to be housing discussion, but there'll be some other important things on the retreat. But if we do that, we should just limit the number of, minimize the number of staff that are there. We'll figure that out.
Thank you.
I'm okay with meeting in person.
All right. Okay, from Mark, I saw Matt nod his head to that.
Ditto.
Evelyn and Kathleen.
It's okay, whatever.
Yeah, it's like at this point, whatever.
All right.
I did, for what it's worth, I can share from medics in my world, the clinical research who have been talking about, that each time that it mutates, the virulence, even though it's more contagious, in the big picture, it's actually getting less and less in terms of the symptoms and such, although they are finding that even mild COVID is changing cognitive function. So interesting, take for what it's worth on the clinical research side.
Yeah, understood. Well, I am sensing some willingness and perhaps even readiness to have the board retreat in person on the 21st. I do think that it would be nice to, I personally think it would be nice for us to have these discussions in the room together. And I think also that, Eric, if things come up on the side where suddenly this feels like that's not going to work or people are going to be super uncomfortable, I just hope that y'all won't hesitate to let us know, so we can, I want to be this, we've all been through, it's been quite an ordeal and we're still in the midst of it. Like Kathleen said, this baby's still going and we're just in the next phase of it. We're figuring it out as we go along. And so we need to continue to be flexible, and it could be that something changes. We come back in person, something changes and we've got to dial it back again. I think we just have to be kind of ready for anything. But sorry, Eric, were you about to say something?
Yeah, thanks. Staff will get together and we'll come back to figure out how to do it. And so we have a minimum number of staff there, and it could be that we Zoom in if there's some key staff, just to minimize it or whatever, to have it done that way. And as always, if the board has a question or there's information we need to produce that we can't get because someone's not there, it's easy for us to say, we don't know, but we'll find out. We'll do the research and come back to you at the next meeting and follow up. So, but we'll figure it out and get back to the board.
All right, thank you. And I will just say that I'm going, on a trip with our family and my father the following week. And so I'll be, when we're in the room together, I'm going to be wearing a mask because we're all going to be trying to be extra careful, before we go on this venture together. So just know if you're that person, I'm also that person who may want to do that.
So does that mean that Mayor Pro Tem will be leading our 28th meeting?
Oh, I think that there's some question about, so possibly that's the meeting we
Okay.
talked about.
Yeah.
That's the meeting we talked about. I will
Yeah.
definitely be out of town. I think there's some question about whether that meeting will be held or not, but I appreciate you being at the ready.
Yeah. I was like, wait, did I hear something?
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you'll be able to go on a trip.
Yeah.
Long time coming, I'm sure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bit by bit. All right, then our next item is here we are, hot topics for the work session. So there's currently no hot topics. I mean, the one thing we do have continuing is the task force discussion. I wouldn't be here for that. Eric, are there other things that are on that meeting? Should we have that meeting anyway and let that conversation continue whether or not I'm there?
I'll defer to the board on whether or not you want to continue the task force review. I'll just make a quick comment. It is the mayor's task force, and you, as the mayor, you are not, convened it and were there. And I think that the mayoral insight and perspective is helpful at the meeting, but once again, defer to the board whether or not, if you want to continue at the workshop, that's okay. But my preference would be just we continue that conversation in April. As far as the actual workshop, we don't have anything at this moment, but as the board knows, so many times over the years, things can come up. So at this point, I would say usually what we do is defer to the staff and the mayor. And if we come, when it's agenda time and there's nothing of significance, then we just say there's nothing of significance and we pull the plug on the meeting, but we keep it open in case something does come up that's urgent. So it's, we'll just wait and see, but happy to adjust and do whatever the board prefers.
All right, thank you. I certainly would prefer to be there for discussions about the task force. But I think I'm just mindful that I want to be sure the public knows that this is important to us and that, it's not dropping off the radar. We're just giving it the time and attention it needs, which is going to take some time. Any other strong feelings about that from you all to the contrary?
I would think you should be there. I would like you to be there. So I'm fine, doing that in April and not necessarily addressing that on the 28th.
Okay.
Agree.
I agree. I think it's helpful to have some of the hole behind the curtain that you can help us understand.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll just see what unfolds over the next week or so to see what happens if other items appear, as sometimes they do. All right, departmental reports we have in our packet. Any questions or comments about those? All right, I believe that just leaves, sorry, I'm having to bounce back and forth on my agenda because I don't know what I did with my paper agenda. So I'm flipping through my iPad.
So we're on number 8 for board member updates.
Thank you. I just got there. Okay, so board updates. Let's try and keep it to only necessary updates. And I will start by saying I do not have any updates except to say that there was one news article and one op-ed in the News and Observer over the past couple of weeks about the MPO's 2050 plan. And the News and Observer editorial was favorable to the plan, while it still acknowledged the real obstacles that exist. Mark.
I have 4 updates, but I will spare you and just tell you about the Community Home Trust meeting on March 10th. We had a lot of discussion about operational parts of the organization. And then I initiated a request for feedback from all the members regarding affordable housing and frameworks they might have, or approaches for town-owned properties being used for permanently affordable housing. And I got good feedback from Councilmember Barbara Middleton Fouché from Carborough. And I'm going to meet with her next week to talk a little bit more about their framework. And then that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Rob.
I don't have really anything essential. I did send you all an email earlier today with an attachment from Orange County Climate Council. And so if you have an opportunity to read it before Thursday and give me any feedback, that would be fantastic. It's just an annual report and status. They decided not to do an in-person face front event this year. And more of a kind of report out. The new Orange County Sustainability Manager started last week, actually, but this will be her first meeting on Thursday. So if you have an opportunity to read it and have anything you want me to share, please just let me know.
Thank you, Rob. Evelyn.
Have a meeting tomorrow night that should last all of 4 hours, and I'm serious.
Oh,
Better.
okay. Well, then let's get you home. Let's get you home for tonight.
It's gonna be an argument. It's gonna be nothing but an argument.
Oh,
But I will have to go. It's this station number 3, which makes it harder.
okay.
That's out on Walker Road. Anybody wants to go.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for sitting through that on our behalf. Kathleen.
Well, we are moving ahead on project review. Just for folks to know, and I'll share this with the collaborative, but the League's Legislative Action Committee, the first meeting has occurred. So one of those pieces that introduced based on the home collaborative was the right of first refusal for when developers want to develop or sell mobile home parks. We're seeking the right of first refusal legislation to allow residents to purchase that. We'll see if it makes it through the whole legislative priorities, but at least we've got that going. There are additional meetings, so if there are other issues, and this is for staff too, so it ranges literally the full gamut of municipal areas that either we feel we need some different or additional legislation, or if we need to remove or modify existing legislation. So full topics. So they will be whittled down to, if you remember last year, we presented there were the top 17 or 18 and prioritized, and out came 14 or 12, whatever. So this is the beginning of that process. So we want to get anything that's staff or electeds in the chute for the league to advocate with the General Assembly.
Thank you, Kathleen. And I'm sorry, should we, if we have ideas about that, should we just send that directly to you, or will there be a?
Send it to me, because
Okay.
I'll be going to all 4 meetings.
Great, thank you.
No, thank you.
Matt.
Great, thank you. Just two short little updates. FSA met earlier today. A lot of the conversation focused on really how our local communities are dealing with COVID. We had a great update from our health director, Quintana Stewart, and we did get to share some really good information across jurisdictions about various ways that FSA and other organizations are pushing to get digital devices in folks' hands. How do we get internet out to folks who really need it? Some of those communities that are being served by FSA, for example, in Carborough, Carborough is pushing forward with extending some of their town-owned wireless out to some of those communities, including, I believe that was a mobile home park in Carborough. So a lot of good work and on that front, and then also getting monies to folks to incentivize getting and being part of FSA out in the community, as well as some mini grants to help improve folks' neighborhoods. Unfortunately, one concern that's already come up is a lot of folks who might want to do some improvements to their mobile home or their mobile home community, for example, might feel those improvements either will cause jealousy amongst other residents, or it'll be used as a way to raise rent because you're making it more desirable to live there. So that was on the FSA front. And then I don't think I have another update. There was one, but that was really the biggest one.
Thank you. And that covers everybody. Is there any updates from the town manager? Okay. And even though I was out of order before, the staff updates are in our packet. And if there are no questions or comments about staff reports, then we can be adjourned. Didn't quite make it at 11. It's 11:01. Oh, it's 11:02. Thanks everybody for sticking with us, and take good care of yourselves. Have a good week. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Bye.